Los Angeles, January 2017. The sun was setting over woodland hills, casting golden light across manicured lawns, swaying palm trees, and mansions that lined the quiet streets like trophies. Behind one of those gates stood a home many would envy. A pristine estate with a crystal blue pool, a gleaming black Porsche in the driveway, and the illusion of a perfect family life. But on this winter afternoon, that illusion was about to shatter forever. 16-year-old Natalie Moretti came home from a long day, school, a job interview, a quick errand at her mother's request. Just an ordinary Tuesday. She tapped in the garage code, just like always, and stepped through the side door into the kitchen. What she saw next would change her life and haunt her forever. There, through the wide kitchen window, was her father, Victor Moretti, slumped in a patio chair by the pool. At first, Natalie thought maybe he dozed off. But as she stepped closer, the truth hit her like a brick to the chest. There was blood, so much blood, on the walls, on the floor, on the doorframe, and on him. Victor wasn't sleeping. He was dead. She froze. The world stood still. And then panic, screams. She dropped everything and dialed 911, her voice trembling, almost breaking as she begged for help. "Please, my dad. I think he's dead. There's blood. Oh my God, there's blood everywhere." Minutes later, her mother, Clara Moretti, came rushing in through the backyard. Together, they tried to revive Victor, but it was far too late. The paramedics would arrive shortly after 5 p.m. and pronounce him dead at the scene. The cause? Multiple stab wounds to the face, neck, and torso. Brutal, personal, rage-filled. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something else. Victor Moretti was no ordinary man. At 49, he had built a name for himself. A celebrity hairstylist with a high-end clientele and a glowing reputation in Hollywood. Known affectionately as Big V in his circle, Victor was charming, generous, and fiercely proud of his Italian roots. His clients adored him. His protégés admired him. His family? They were everything to him. He and Clara had been married for nearly 20 years. They shared 2 daughters, Natalie and Sophia, and Victor had a son, Marco, from a previous marriage. From the outside, they looked like a picture-perfect success story. The house, the vacations, the glamour, the life. But under that glossy surface, something was deeply wrong. The investigation began immediately. The home's extensive security system should have offered answers. Footage, timestamps, faces. But when detectives went to retrieve the DVR, it was missing. Gone. Why would a burglar steal a security hard drive, but leave behind an $8,000 Rolex still strapped to Victor's wrist? That didn't make sense. None of it did. The Porsche? Gone, but later found, abandoned with traces of blood inside. The cameras from a neighbor's house captured 2 hooded figures sprinting from the Moretti property around the estimated time of death. Convenient. Suspiciously convenient. At first glance, it looked like a home invasion, but the details told a different story. There was no forced entry, no ransacking, just murder, and grief, and questions. So many questions. Detectives turned to Clara. After all, she was the last person to see Victor alive. According to her, they had spent a normal afternoon at home. She said she left around 3:30 p.m. to shop at Target and was gone for just over an hour. When she returned, her husband was dead. Bad timing? Maybe. But convenient? Her daughter, Natalie, had also been delayed that day, sent to pick up prescription glasses that Clara had called about just moments before. If she hadn't made that detour, she might have walked in during the murder. That chilled detectives to their core. Was this planned? Did the killer know the house would be empty? In those first 48 hours, the police held back their suspicions. But privately, the doubts were growing. Too many things lined up a little too perfectly. And Victor? He hadn't been a man with enemies. He was generous to a fault, always smiling. A mentor, a father, a husband, a man who once said in an interview, "I just hope I'm remembered for how I made people feel." Now, he'd be remembered for how he died. But as the pieces began to fall into place, investigators uncovered something shocking. A name, Damian Cole, a man with a record, a man with secrets, and a man whose blood had been found at the crime scene. And what's more, Damien wasn't a stranger to Clara Moretti. No, he was something much, much worse. He was her lover. And this wasn't just a betrayal. This was murder. Planned, precise, cold-blooded. Victor Moretti wasn't born into wealth. No silver spoon, no Hollywood connections. Just a boy from Toronto, Canada, the son of Italian immigrants, raised with old-world values. Family, hard work, loyalty. He was 17 when he dropped out of high school. Not because he lacked ambition, quite the opposite. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to be a stylist. A few short years later, he and his sister opened a salon in their basement. That humble space would be the foundation for what would become a career that soared far beyond what any of them imagined. By the time he was in his 40s, Victor had become a fixture in the world of elite beauty professionals. He styled hair for movie sets, for award shows. Jackie Chan, Russell Crowe, Jennifer Lopez, just a few of the stars who trusted him with their image. But despite his glamorous career, Victor never lost his grounding. He was warm, approachable, the kind of man who remembered your birthday, even if he'd only met you once. He mentored hundreds, spoke at conferences, served as creative director for a massive global beauty brand. But if you asked him what mattered most, he'd say, my family. Always my family. In interviews, Victor would talk about sitting in his backyard, glass of wine in hand, dreaming about legacy. What do I want to be remembered for? He once mused. The relationships I built, the way I made people feel. He was that kind of man, the kind that made others feel seen, important, valued. And his family? They were the center of it all. His wife, Clara, his daughters, Natalie and Sophia, his son from a previous marriage, Marco, a tight-knit unit, living the dream in one of LA's most affluent suburbs, Woodland Hills. Their home had it all: a pool, marble countertops, designer furniture, expensive art on the walls. They vacationed in Hawaii, Cabo, and the Virgin Islands. Private chefs, personal trainers, housekeepers. To the outside world, they were the American dream. But behind the facade of perfection, a storm had been quietly brewing. It started, as these things often do, with distance. Victor traveled often for work. Education conferences in New York. Product launches in Paris. Film shoots in Toronto. Clara, meanwhile, spent her days at home, managing the household. By 2015, she was feeling restless, bored, trapped in a golden cage. That year, she joined a racquetball league at the local LA fitness. Said she wanted to get fit, make friends, and that's where she met Damien Cole. Damien was charismatic, muscular, 54 years old, with a checkered past and a sleazy charm that some women might mistake for confidence. He was a personal trainer, a former Army sergeant, and a registered sex offender. Years ago, he had been convicted of lewd acts with a minor, his stepdaughter. Somehow, Clara either didn't know or didn't care, because what started as casual flirtation at the gym quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Damien taught Clara how to swing a racket, how to breathe between serves. But that wasn't all. Soon, she was emailing him, texting him, calling him, thousands of times. Between January 2016 and January 2017, Clara and Damien exchanged more than 26,000 phone calls and messages. Let that number sink in. That's more than 70 calls or texts every single day for an entire year. This wasn't just an affair. This was an obsession. And Clara? She wasn't hiding it very well. Victor's eldest daughter, Sophia, recalled the first time she saw Damien in her parents' bedroom. She had gone in her mother's bathroom to borrow some mascara. When she came out, there he was, lying in the bed. Her mother said he'd gotten drunk at a party and needed a place to sleep it off. But the mansion had 6 bedrooms. Why Clara had chosen her bed for him to sleep in? The answer was obvious and sickening. Still, Victor never suspected a thing. He trusted Clara, believed in their marriage. He was too busy working, providing, trying to build a legacy for the family he loved so deeply. He never imagined the betrayal that was unfolding behind his back. But Clara wasn't just cheating for pleasure. She was planning something cold, calculated, irrevocable, because love wasn't the only thing Damien had to offer. He had something Clara needed, a willingness to get his hands dirty. He wasn't afraid of violence. And Clara wasn't afraid to ask. They began using encrypted apps, specifically Viber, to hide their communications. They talked in code, avoided detection, planned. She even sent him the login to the home's security system. Not just the password, the entire access credential. Think about that for a moment. Clara handed her lover the keys to the digital kingdom of her home, where her husband and daughters slept. She told police she barely knew Damien, couldn't remember his last name, but her phone passcode was his birthday. And when police asked to check her phone, she pretended not to know the passcode at all. The truth? She was hiding him from the very beginning. Victor Moretti had spent decades building a life of integrity, trust, and compassion. But in just a few short months, Clara and Damien would tear it all down, not with anger, not with passion, but with something much colder: greed. And the worst part? It wasn't just Victor who would pay the price. January 23rd, 2017. By 5:15 p.m., the Moretti estate was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. Yellow tape flapped gently in the breeze. Officers moved silently through the halls. Forensics teams photographed everything: the blood smears, the footprints, the discarded towel. The silence inside that once bustling house was almost deafening. Outside, neighbors gathered, whispering, shocked. Inside, the questions began. Victor Moretti had been stabbed multiple times: face, neck, chest. It wasn't just violent. It was personal, intimate, rage-filled. And yet, something didn't sit right. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No peaked locks. No kicked-in doors. It was as if the killer had known exactly how to get in, and exactly who'd be there. The theory of a robbery gone wrong was the first to emerge. After all, Victor's prized Porsche was missing. And just weeks earlier, other break-ins had been reported in affluent neighborhoods nearby. Could have been part of that same pattern? Maybe. But the details? They didn't add up. Victor's Rolex, worth over $8,000, was still on his wrist, completely untouched. And while the Porsche was gone, nothing else inside the house had been taken. No electronics, no ULD, no cash, just the car. And more disturbingly, the security system's hard drive. It had been ripped out and taken. Why would a burglar go to that level of precision? Why steal surveillance footage, but leave valuables untouched? This wasn't theft. This was cleanup. When detectives turned to the family for interviews, Clara Moretti kept her composure. Calm. Controlled. Too controlled. She said she'd been at Target around the time of the murder. Shopping. Just a regular afternoon. But when asked what she bought, she couldn't quite remember. Detectives noted her demeanor. She sobbed, but produced no tears. She gasped, but showed no physical signs of shock. They didn't jump to conclusions. Not yet. After all, everyone reacts to grief differently, right? Still, something about Clara's story seemed rehearsed. Convenient. She said Victor was alive when she left, around 3:30 p.m. By 5 o'clock, he was gone. That's an hour and a half. Barely enough time for a brutal murder, a theft, and a total disappearance in broad daylight. And then there was Natalie, their 16-year-old daughter, who'd also been delayed that afternoon by Clara's request. Clara had called her right after school to pick up a pair of prescription glasses before coming home, something she'd never asked her to do before. ¿Hacerme favor? Or was she making sure Natalie didn't come home too soon? The timeline became clearer once detectives retrieved surveillance footage from the surrounding houses. At 3:47 p.m., Clara's other daughter, Sophia, was seen driving off to a babysitting job Clara had arranged. At 4:53 p.m., Victor's Porsche was seen pulling out of the driveway. Just 1 minute later, 4:54, Natalie arrived home. That's how close she was. 1 minute. 1 minute later, and she might have seen her father die, or worse. 5 minutes after that, Clara returned. So let's pause here. A random killer in a gated neighborhood just happened to break in during the exact 90-minute window when everyone in the family was out? Doesn't that feel a little too perfect? Detectives thought so too. Then came the moment that changed everything. A trace of blood, not Victor's. It didn't match Clara or Natalie or Sophia, but it did match someone in the national DNA database. A man named Damian Cole. Bingo. Who was Damian Cole? On paper, a personal trainer. Former military. Lived with a roommate in a dingy apartment. Struggled to make ends meet. But dig deeper, and a darker picture emerged. Damian was a registered sex offender, convicted of molesting his own stepdaughter in the 90s. He'd done time, lost his military rank, and after his release, he found work in LA's underbelly, personal training by day, adult films by night. That's right, Clara Moretti had been having an affair with a broke, convicted sex offender who also moonlighted in porn. It was the kind of twist that would seem absurd in a movie, but this was real, and worse, Victor Moretti had no idea. When detectives asked Clara if she knew Damian Cole, she hesitated. Said she might have seen him once at the gym. Couldn't recall his last name. Didn't know where he lived. But when they showed her photos, including one from Victor's wake, taken just 6 days after the murder, there Damian was, standing behind the family, wearing a fresh bandage on his hand. Damian had not only attended the funeral, he'd inserted himself into the grieving circle. Uninvited, unnoticed, and bleeding. That cut? It matched the DNA left at the crime scene. Police began tailing Damian. Surveillance. Phones. Trash pulls. It didn't take long to find patterns. He was still in contact with Clara. Still meeting her. They were lovers. Still, she wasn't grieving. She was texting. She wasn't planning a funeral. She was planning a future. With him, detectives were no longer asking, who killed Victor Moretti? They were asking something much darker. How many people helped him die? And when did Clara Moretti stop being a grieving widow and become a suspect? Damian Cole was not the kind of man you'd expect to find at the center of a Hollywood murder. Not at first glance. Tall, tanned, muscular. He looked more like a fitness influencer than a convicted felon. But behind that sculpted exterior was a history that made seasoned detectives flinch. Born in Germany, Damian had moved to the U.S. as a child. Raised in North Carolina, he joined the Army in his early 20s and climbed the ranks, until everything came crashing down. In 1993, Damian was convicted of lewd and lascivious acts against a minor, his own stepdaughter. Let that sink in. He was dishonorably discharged, registered as a sex offender, and sent to prison. And when he got out, he faded into the background, never quite rebuilding, never quite repenting. He bounced from job to job, lived modestly, taught racquetball and weight training at a gym in Canoga Park. But that wasn't all. Damian had also found work in the shadows, acting in adult films under an alias. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. But he was desperate. And that desperation is what made him dangerous. In 2015, he met Clara Moretti at LA Fitness. She was wealthy, beautiful, married. He was older, rough around the edges, mysterious. The chemistry? Immediate. Clara flirted first, during a racquetball lesson. Then she emailed him, asked for his number, booked more sessions, and before long, they were lovers. They met in motels, in her car, sometimes in her house. Yes, the house where Victor Moretti lived. One afternoon, Clara's daughter Sophia walked into her mother's bedroom to borrow some mascara and saw Damian lying in the bed. Clara brushed it off, said he was just drunk from a party, said he needed a place to sleep it off. But why that bed? Why not one of 5 guest rooms? Because Damian Cole wasn't a guest. He was home. Between 2016 and 2017, Clara and Damian contacted each other over 26,000 times. You heard that right. She called him over 9,000 times. He called her over 17,000 times. They were completely consumed by each other. Addicted. But Victor? He had no clue. He was away on business most weeks, flying between LA, New York, Toronto, speaking at events, launching products, providing. And while he was gone, Damian was slipping into his world, into his wife, into his home. It wasn't just lust. It was invasion. Still, affairs, even obsessive ones, don't always lead to murder. But this one was different. Damian wanted more. And Clara? She wanted out, but not with a divorce lawyer. Not with custody battles and community property settlements. No, that would be too clean, too slow. Instead, They made a different kind of plan, whispered between workouts, encrypted through Viber, hidden behind, "I miss you and can't wait to see you." The plan was simple. Victor had to die. When Damien was first brought in for questioning, he denied everything. He didn't know Clara that well, had only trained her once or twice, had never been inside the Moretti home. But the DNA didn't lie. His blood was at the crime scene. Not just a drop. Multiple smears in the kitchen, on the back patio, in the stolen Porsche. There was no innocent explanation. And Clara? She claimed she barely knew his name. But police found something damning. Her phone passcode, the one she forgot when they asked for it. It was Damien's birthday. You don't forget the passcode to your phone when it's the same as your lover's birthday. You just pretend to. When detectives searched Clara's phone and computer, they uncovered a web of deceit. She had shared her home security system credentials with Damien months before the murder. The system was extensive. Cameras throughout the property. A central DVR hidden inside the house. She told him how to access it, where it was stored, what the blind spots were. And on the day Victor was killed, that DVR was gone. Stolen. Wiped clean. Just vanished. But Damien had made one crucial mistake. He bled, and his blood told the truth. The surveillance intensified. Detectives followed Damien for weeks. One night, they tailed him to a bar where Clara was already waiting. They kissed, held hands, laughed. This was just 1 month after Victor's murder. Clara wasn't grieving. She was celebrating. In February, Clara called the police multiple times, but not to ask about leads, not to offer new information. No, she wanted to know when the life insurance money would be released. You remember what she said the night of the murder? There was no life insurance. That was a lie. Victor had multiple policies, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Clara? She was the primary beneficiary. She also told Victor's son, Marco, that he'd be receiving money too. She even hinted that maybe he could send some back to help out. In fact, on the day Victor died, when she called Marco to break the news, her first words were about the insurance. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "He's gone." Just, "There's money coming." The motive was crystal clear. Clara wanted the money. Damien wanted Clara. And Victor? Victor was just in the way. But Damien didn't act alone. Because to carry out a murder this bold, this brutal, you need more than lust and greed. You need help. And Damien knew exactly who to call. Clara Moretti once told her personal trainer that she didn't want to throw away 20 years of marriage. That she was unhappy, but she'd never leave Victor. Not because of love, but because of what she stood to lose. The lifestyle, the vacations, the status, the comfort. She didn't want a divorce. She wanted freedom without the cost. And Damien Cole was her ticket out. But even Damien couldn't pull off a murder like this alone. He needed help. Enter Ethan Rhodes, a name that, at first, meant nothing to investigators, until they traced phone records and flight bookings. And what they found changed everything. Ethan was Damien's childhood friend. They'd grown up together in North Carolina, gone to school together, shared Army stories, stayed in touch through every high and every low. When Damien needed a favor, the kind of favor that gets blood on your hands, he called Ethan, paid for his plane ticket from Alaska, picked him up from the airport, brought him home, and handed him a knife. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a contract. According to Damien, Ethan didn't know the full plan, just that there would be a break-in, a scare, maybe a rough-up. But that wasn't true, because Ethan would later admit he knew they were going to kill someone. He just didn't think it would be this real. They planned everything. Wore hoodies, gloves, jogged to the Moretti house on foot to avoid license plate detection, hid their faces from neighborhood cameras. Like professionals, like killers. Damien was supposed to go in alone. Ethan would wait outside, keep watch. But when Damien saw Victor sitting poolside, unaware, peaceful, something snapped. He didn't hesitate. In his confession, Damien said Victor turned around, startled, tried to grab him, fought back. But Damien? He just kept stabbing. Again and again. Until Victor collapsed. Until there was no more resistance. No more fight. Just silence. He didn't know how many times he stabbed him. Didn't care. "I just kept cutting," he said. Until he let go. After the murder, they tried to stage a burglary. pulled out drawers, scattered clothes. Then, they took the Porsche and fled. They dumped the car the same night, but they didn't clean it well enough. Victor's blood was all over the back seat. So was Damien's. Back at the house, Clara was on her phone, browsing Target, checking her home surveillance from the store's Wi-Fi, waiting for confirmation, waiting for him to die. She hadn't mentioned the Target trip to police in her initial statement. Only after footage surfaced of her meeting Damien in the parking lot, just minutes before the murder, did she admit it happened. And even then, she claimed it was coincidence. Just two friends chatting. Two friends who exchanged 95 encrypted messages that day. Two friends who met just before one of them stabbed her husband to death. Coincidence? No. This was coordination. After the murder, Clara didn't retreat in grief. She didn't cry herself to sleep. She didn't even stop talking to Damien. In fact, she doubled down. Investigators discovered she had been introducing herself as Clara Cole, using Damien's last name. Her excuse? It was easier to pronounce than Moretti. Sure. And apparently, she'd also been planning to buy Damien a house in Las Vegas with a life insurance payout. Victor's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was step one in her new life plan. The surveillance continued. In one chilling moment, caught on tape just a month after Victor's murder, Clara and Damien stood outside a bar. They kissed. They laughed. He whispered, "I love you." She said, "I think we should get married." Inside the police van across the street, investigators stared at each other in silence. That was all they needed. August 2017. The trap was set. Clara and Damien were arrested together, on purpose. The goal? To see what they'd say to each other in custody. And what they said was shocking. They spoke in code, whispered promises, made plans, even joked about getting married in jail, still trying to outmaneuver justice. But the walls were closing in. Clara tried to claim Damien had cut himself during racquetball, which is why his blood was in her house. She even said she used a towel to clean his hand that day. But that didn't explain the blood in the Porsche. It didn't explain the DNA on the kitchen floor. It didn't explain the encrypted messages. She lied, over and over, and none of it worked. Because the prosecution had more. They had an email from June 2016, 8 months before the murder. Clara had sent Damien the login credentials to her home security system. She hadn't just told him how to get in. She showed him where to hide, where to disable cameras, where the blind spots were. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated execution. And now, all that remained was to find the second hooded man, the one spotted on surveillance, the one who kept watch outside, the one who'd helped Damien disappear into the night. The trail was cold, until it wasn't. By late 2017, detectives had pieced together most of the puzzle. Victor Moretti had been murdered, brutally, intentionally, and with surgical timing. Damien Cole was the killer. Clara Moretti was the motive. But there was still one shadowy figure missing from the picture, the second man in the hoodie. The one spotted on the neighbor's camera. The one who'd stood guard while Victor bled to death just steps from his kitchen. They had a face, but no name, until October. Investigators followed a paper trail, bank records, flight logs, burner phones. And that's when the name Ethan Rhodes popped up again. He had flown in from Alaska on January 20th, stayed at Damien's place, bought a knife at a local hardware store, and left town 3 days later, right after the murder. Coincidence? Not a chance. They tracked him down in Anchorage. He was tired, nervous, almost relieved to be caught. And when they put the evidence in front of him, he cracked. Ethan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He admitted everything. He and Damien had planned the attack. Damien was the primary killer. Ethan was the lookout. But he wasn't just a bystander. He knew why they were doing it. And worse, he knew who wanted it done. I remember Damien saying, Ethan told police, "She's about to come into some money." He said Damien had tried to get him to come down earlier, in December, but the timing hadn't worked. "It'll be worth it," Damien told him. Trust me, money was always part of the conversation. But that wasn't all. Ethan recalled Damien saying something else, something more personal. She doesn't like him anymore. She wants him gone. She, as in Clara. Not once did Damien ever claim it was for justice, or self-defense, or passion. It was about getting rid of Victor. so she could collect the payout, so they could start a new life, so Damien could finally have her. But here's where it gets even colder. Ethan wasn't the only one Damien confided in. There was another man in their circle, Travis Kane, a mutual friend from their old neighborhood. At one point, Travis had been a suspect, but his alibi checked out. He wasn't in Los Angeles during the murder, but he had been in the room when it was discussed. According to Ethan, Travis listened silently as Damien laid out the plan. What they'd do, how they'd escape, and how Clara would make it all disappear with a few sweet words and a kiss. It was a conspiracy. Even if Travis didn't swing the knife, he knew. They all knew. And what about Clara? Her hands were clean. Literally. She never touched the weapon. She never entered the crime scene. But her fingerprints were all over this murder. She manipulated the schedule, cleared the house, sent her daughter to pick up glasses she didn't need, met Damien in the Target parking lot just minutes before the attack. She gave him the security credentials. She provided the layout of the house. She watched her cameras from the store as her husband died. And when the deed was done, she smiled at the life insurance papers. That's not metaphor. Victor's son, Marco, said she was stroking the documents like they were something precious, gazing at them, petting them. It was sick, unforgivable. And still, Damien tried to protect her. He claimed she knew nothing, that he acted alone, that he never told her, even after he'd confessed, even after he'd been sentenced to life in prison without parole. He lied. For her. But his loyalty meant nothing now, because Ethan Rhodes had told the truth. And the truth was this. Clara Moretti wanted her husband dead. So what now? Justice. Real cold legal justice. Clara was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. She pleaded not guilty. Her defense? She was manipulated by Damien. That he had acted alone. That she had no idea he was going to kill her husband. But the jury didn't buy it. Not when they saw the Viber messages. Not when they heard about the 26,000 calls. Not when they saw her on video, kissing Damien outside a bar, while her daughters cried themselves to sleep in a house that still smelled of bleach and blood. In the end, it was her own words that sealed her fate. The emails, the passwords, the digital footprints she thought would disappear. But nothing disappears in the age of surveillance. Not even murder. 3 people, now, stood accountable. Damien Cole, the killer, sentenced to life without parole. Ethan Rhodes, the accomplice, sentenced after his guilty plea. Clara Moretti, the wife who started it all, now awaiting her own verdict. The courtroom was silent as the judge handed down the sentence. But in the hearts of Victor's children, no sentence would ever be enough. He was gone, and no amount of justice, no number of convictions, would ever bring him back. From the beginning, Clara Moretti had played her role masterfully. The grieving widow, the broken mother, the woman robbed of her husband by senseless violence. But it was just that, a role, a performance. And now, the mask was slipping. No, scratch that. The mask was shattering. In court, prosecutors laid it all bare. The phone records, the Viber messages, the surveillance videos, and Clara's carefully crafted image, it crumbled under the weight of reality. They showed how she met with Damien Cole just minutes before the murder, how she sent her daughter on an unnecessary errand, delaying her return home, how she stood in Target, glued to her phone, checking her home security feed like she was waiting for a delivery. Only, this wasn't groceries. This was murder. They revealed how she lied, repeatedly, to the police, to her family, to her children, that she had told Victor's son, Marco, that there was no life insurance, then held the documents in her hand and smiled once Victor was dead. She didn't just lie. She reveled in it. Prosecutors called it the performance of a lifetime, because Clara didn't just orchestrate her husband's murder. She tried to erase herself from the crime. No fingerprints, no weapon, no direct act of violence. But every decision, every move, every message she sent was a step toward Victor's grave. And the evidence? It was overwhelming. An email, sent months before the murder, where Clara gave Damien the login credentials to the home security system. The Viber app, which they used to send 95 messages the day of the killing, then both deleted it that night. The password to her phone, Damien's birthday. Her refusal to cooperate when asked for that passcode. And the chilling way she began introducing herself as Clara Cole, just weeks after her husband's death, as if she had already replaced Victor's name in her mouth. And in her heart, Victor's daughter, Natalie, took the stand. She spoke softly, tearfully, a girl forced to grow up too fast after walking in on the scene of her father's slaughter. She remembered her mother's strange calm, how Clara knelt beside Victor's body but showed no panic, no shaking hands, no urgency, just emptiness. And then there was Sophia, who saw Damien in her mother's bed, who remembered the thousands of calls and texts, the suspicious glances, the disappearances. These weren't accidents. They were breadcrumbs, and Clara had dropped them everywhere. Still, Clara kept lying, even when confronted with a mountain of evidence. Even when Damien, the man who loved her enough to kill for her, testified. He claimed he acted alone, that Clara never told him to do it, that he was just trying to win her. But his words couldn't save her. Not when Ethan had already flipped. Not when Clara's entire digital footprint read like a murder playbook. Not when prosecutors found a search on her laptop that read, "Do the police have the right to tap my phone?" Guilt, clear as glass. The prosecution called it what it was. Premeditated, cold-blooded, calculated. A woman who wanted the wealth, but not the man. A woman who wanted the freedom, but not the divorce. A woman who traded her husband's life for a payout and a porn star boyfriend. The jury didn't need long. They returned with their verdict. Guilty. First-degree murder. Conspiracy. Fraud. And in that moment, the mask came off completely. Clara didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared straight ahead, lips tight, jaw clenched, as if the woman inside her had died long ago, and all that remained was the architect of death. After the trial, Victor's children issued a brief statement. Our father was kind, joyful, and full of love. He was taken from us in the most brutal way, not by strangers, but by someone we trusted. We will never forgive, but we will survive. Natalie Moretti began studying hairstyling, following in her father's footsteps. Sophia went to college. Marco returned to Canada and never spoke to Clara again. The family that Victor built was left to heal without him. As for Damien, he sits in a maximum security prison. No parole, no future, still calling Clara his soulmate. And Clara? She now waits behind bars for her sentence to begin. Her legacy is no longer one of elegance or family or charm. It is blood and betrayal. The woman who once claimed, "Why throw away 20 years?" threw away everything. Her husband, her children, her life, for a man who wore a mask and wielded a knife. The gavel came down. Life in prison. No parole. That was the sentence for Clara Moretti, the woman who had once walked red carpets beside her husband, now reduced to a prison jumpsuit, shackled and silent. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. The courtroom watched as she was led away, not with rage, not with fear, but with the hollow numbness of someone who had already lost everything. Damien Cole had already begun serving his time. Life without parole in a maximum security facility. Ethan Rhodes, after pleading guilty, was also sentenced, a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation, but prison nonetheless. And with that, the three people who conspired to destroy a life were finally locked behind bars. Justice, many said, had been served, but for those who loved Victor Moretti, it was complicated, because justice doesn't bring back a father. Justice doesn't dry the tears of a 16-year-old girl who found her dad's lifeless body by the pool. Justice doesn't erase the memory of blood on the kitchen floor. Victor's family mourned him not just for who he was, but for how he was lost. He wasn't a man tangled in dangerous business. He wasn't a criminal or a man who lived recklessly. He was a husband, a father, a friend, a mentor, a man who brought joy into rooms with his smile and humility. He built a legacy, not of wealth or glamour, but of kindness. And he died at the hands of people who mistook kindness for weakness. In the aftermath of the trial, Natalie Moretti struggled to sleep. She'd started therapy, switched schools, cut her hair short, a symbolic gesture, she said, to start over. She refused to visit her mother in prison. In interviews, she spoke softly, carefully. I still have dreams where he's sitting by the pool, she said. Like nothing happened. Like I never found him that way. Then she paused. But in the dream, I get to say goodbye. Sophia Moretti, too, went quiet in the months after the trial. She kept mostly to herself, tried to rebuild a sense of normalcy. But what is normal when the person you trusted most, your mother, betrayed you in the worst way imaginable? She once said, I feel like I lost both my parents that day. And she wasn't wrong, because even though Clara lived, the woman they knew had died with Victor. Marco Romano, Victor's son from a previous marriage, took a different path. He returned to Canada, disconnected from the chaos. He wrote a letter to Clara, not to forgive her, but to make something clear. You didn't just kill a man, he wrote. You shattered a world, and you don't deserve a single memory of him. He refused the insurance money, refused to speak Clara's name in public again. To him, Victor's story didn't end with blood. It ended with legacy. And that legacy? It lived on. Through hundreds of hairstylists across North America who trained under Victor. Through the clients who remembered his kindness, not just his scissors. Through the beauty schools that now hang his photo in their halls. A reminder of what passion and humility can look like. And most of all, through Natalie, who decided to follow in her father's footsteps. She started taking styling classes. Not because she wanted fame, but because she wanted to make people feel the way her dad made people feel important, seen, human. It would take years for the family to begin healing. The house was sold. The Porsche never reclaimed. The memories, some too painful to speak aloud, slowly faded into photographs and closed albums. But there were also new memories. Natalie graduating beauty school. Sophia delivering a TED-style talk about grief and survival. Marco walking his daughter, Victor's granddaughter, into her first day of kindergarten, whispering, your grandpa would have loved you. Victor's voice may have been silenced, but his impact, it still speaks. In every student he mentored, in every client he uplifted, in every moment of kindness passed from one hand to another. And that, perhaps, is the only justice that matters. Not just punishment for the wicked, but preservation of the good. To the outside world, this case was a scandal, a murder drenched in sex, betrayal, and greed. A Hollywood nightmare made real. But to those who knew Victor Moretti, it was something else entirely. It was a loss too great for headlines to hold. Let his story be a reminder that evil doesn't always come wearing a mask. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the breakfast table. Sometimes it shares your bed. But truth always finds a way out, no matter how many lies try to bury it.